Welcome to the next edition of the DFS Down Under show. Smatho 10 is back with the big Hef for another round of AFL football. This is round 6. Somehow the AFL competition is still going. There are no teams left in Victoria. There are no actual home ground advantage this week as well. All neutral venues. Hef is back for another show. Mate, how are you today, mate?
I'm pretty good, thanks, Smatho. It just keeps getting weirder and weirder, doesn't it? That's not your intros either. That's the AFL season. But looking forward to another show.
Look, yes, it is getting weirder and weirder, but for now, daily fantasy contests continue, and as always, you must get to the Daily Fantasy Rankings website for all your AFL tools that you need for your Draftstars and DraftKings lineups for round 6. As always, we always concentrate on the first 2 games of AFL footy, so we're going to be concentrating on the Lions and the Cats and the Pies and the Hawks on Friday night. But as always, before we get stuck in the footy, it's time for Smatho's 2 thumbs up. And as always, these nominations are just getting harder and harder each week here, Hef. I even had to shorten down my little list here so I can make sure I get them all in. But to go through the nominations for 2 thumbs up this week, I start with Agronauts on Thursday on Draftstars, who played Liam Jones, of all people, to take out the 10K prize. And then on DraftKings, we had multiple winners, including Luke Gaddis, who's a US player. He's a quite handy US player as well. Our mate Clangers, he got one S, but he's already had numerous funds up back in the past, so he won't get one. Another international player in 8 Long, who took out another DraftKings contest, and even JK got in the action as well.
Who's that last bloke?
JK123. You might have heard of him.
Yep.
Doesn't like $2 head-to-heads. Some refs come out. But my thumbs up this week goes to, after being called out by yourself last week, I had a good hard think about the segment, thought about the core values of the thumbs up, and I've just gone back to my roots and said, no, Smatho, single bullet wins on Draftstars, get my 2 thumbs up. And this week it goes to Jeffers, or Geffers, if you want to with a G. He took out the Friday night on Draftstars for 10K. Bring up the side here, Hef. Let's have a look at this one. McDonald, Tip and Woody is the one that stands out for me here. Great looking side. It was a closely run contest until Jeffers came along and actually won by heaps in the end. What do you think of this particular winning lineup?
He would have had that song pumping over and over again, wouldn't he? Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody playing footy. He racked up the tackles there, Tip and Woody. We talked about the strong tacklers coming to the fore if the rain came, and we've also talked about that one unique that can be all you need in the single games. So well done to Geffers. About time you saw the writing on the wall, Smatho, and went back to the single bullets. There's no bigger effort than winning one of these contests with a single bullet, if you ask me. And it just keeps the dream alive for everyone. We've had so many this year, it seems. For all the fear in the community of the big multi-entry players, we've really seen these first prize get spread around a lot of new players and small lineup enterers, for want of a better term. So great to see. And yeah, look, you can win with Jordan Roughhead and McDonald, Tip and Woody in your team. There's a chance for everybody.
Look, I didn't check the Thursday night entrance because also you got 3 entries into one. I wondered if Old Jeffers had the free ticket for this one. So,
Wow.
well, that could be a big turn up. But now I've also had to think about the 2 thumbs up here. The production values have been lacking since the avocado has moved on. So I'm now rolling the guys with the 2 thumbs up. Now back to me. 2 thumbs up to you, Jeffers. Well done, mate. Hopefully you won with a ticket. That would have been absolutely nuts if you did. So well done for you for this week.
No doubt he'd watch the show, so write in and let us know, Geffers.
I hope he does. Speaking of the show, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for future content. Obviously, we are doing our own little DraftKings show as well during the week, so make sure you tune into that. But tonight we'll focus on Draftstars contests. And before I get stuck into Thursday night, I want to actually pose the question. In the first time in the history, in our lifetime, I suppose, I'm sure it happened many moons ago, neutral venues. Does that play a part in daily fantasy at all this weekend? Is that something that you have to really think about, or just go, No, it's a football field with goalposts on either end.
Well, it is a football field with goalposts on either end, but well, we're so used to, especially with Geelong. Geelong has such a big home ground advantage that the fact they're not going to be playing there is enough to keep you away from loading up the Geelong stacks that we always like to play down there. If you're really into it, I guess you could go back and look at records. What was this first game at the SCG? You could look at games they've played at the SCG and see how they've gone, but obviously that's going to be against different teams. I'm not going to take too much notice of it. That's a no. That's a long-winded no from me, Smatho. I'm just going to look at the teams and the positions and try and build a lineup that makes sense and hope for the best. I almost talked you into just not talking about this Thursday night contest because fantasy-wise, this is very, very hard work, this game.
All right, mate. Well, let me set you up for this particular match on Thursday. It is the Cats and the Lions at the Sydney Cricket Ground. Currently, totals 129.5, and the spread is around a goal at 6.5. For the fantasy contest, DraftKings have their $30,000 sticks contest, which was $5,000 US for the first position. Whereas on Draftstars, we've got the $75,000 main feature. We've also the $10,000 mini. Then Draftstars also announced today that they're offering $2,000 guaranteed minis for every single game this round. And they also, which is new, the single entry contests are actually going to be available for every single contest as well. So you could be playing that Saturday afternoon game or the Sunday night game. There will be single entry contests there for you as well, which will be hopefully quite popular for players such as myself who like just to go the single bullet.
Yeah, like that one thing on I'll duck in there. DraftKings, they've really changed their prize money structure on that main tournament over the last few weeks. So if you were turned off by the really top heavy structure, give them another look because it's much flatter and much more similar to the Draftstars payouts. So worth another look if that's something that had turned you off DraftKings.
And especially they do have a lot of price points as well for DraftKings. You know, that Mini Max is a very, very good tournament to practice your MME skills. Look, I've been thrown in 40 to 50 contests in that particular tournament, and I'm having a lot of fun watching, particular teams that you might not think were good on paper, they've come through. So, keep supporting the both sites. I'm sure our friends in Victoria now have some more spare time on their hands, so make sure you gamble responsibly. But obviously, you've now got the time to put some work in. Hopefully, it comes bearing fruit.
Yeah, there's the time and the price points. You can really, like you say, you can really mass enter for not much money. So, we've never had it so good in AFL DFS.
No. All right, team news. Now, Dane Zorko is on track to be back after, he's got a dodgy calf/Achilles, so keep an eye on that. Cam Ellis-Yeoman is out, so he's probably a light replacement there. Reece Stanley's going to miss again, so therefore the ruck situation at Geelong is now still not great. And Tommy Atkins' ribs haven't come up, so I don't think we'll see much Geelong news this week on the short turnaround.
What about Gaz? I'm hearing rumours that Gaz is going to have a rest.
350 games up and give him a rest. So look, keep an eye on. We will get the teams, which will be good, and obviously it might give you more options because this game is a little tough nut to crack. So let's see if we can break it position by position and see if we can lead you into a couple of players that might help you out. So for the rucks, we thought that Jarrett Witts was going to make a mockery of the Geelong setup, which is Darcy Fort and Asava Radagaliera, but he only up scoring 63 fantasy points last week, so that's going to ruin the points against table on the DFR site. So we've got Stephen Martin and we've got the Oscar McInerney going up against Darcy Fort and Asava Radagaliera. Here's a mess. Let me give you some CBAs from last week where Steph Martin had 63% of the centre bounce hitouts. Big O was 37%. And then our boy, big boy, McAvoy, come back from the dead. 46% of the ruck contest last week compared to Segler's 54%. Big boy had a really good game last week after having 6 points against the Bulldogs. So, hey,
we'll worry about Big Boy in the next game.
We won't then. So, what are you thinking here? Do you trust data? Do we trust form? Do we just pick one and move on, or double ruck stacks are in play again?
This has been a bit of a case of, I know Steph Martin missed a couple of games with injuries, but he's been the number one guy there for Brisbane. But somehow McInerney just keeps showing him up. There was a game earlier in the year against Freo when McInerney came with a big 85, and that was despite Steph, in theory, being the number one ruck and taking the hit-outs. And it sort of happened again last week against Port, where just the 50 there for Stephen Martin and the big O came to the fore again with a big 74. This is such a hard choice because on the flip side, you've got Darcy Fort, who's going to do the majority of the rucking, you'd think, for Geelong. So at 9,800, he's very playable. It's a big increase on his price from last week. But then it's very hard to score against these Brisbane guys. I think McInerney, as funny as it sounds, is probably the safe play. It's really hard to play Steph Martin until he starts to show that he's not moving as poorly as what he has been. I'm really struggling with this, but yeah, McInerney's my gun to my head tip. But if you do think McInerney's going to be really high owned, that's not really a spot I want to be involved in. So yeah, I think this is definitely a time to be playing around ownerships and maybe Steph Martin ends up being the best player because everyone's got him written off.
We might ask the guys at DFR to sneak up a little Twitter poll either on Wednesday or Thursday. Just put the 4 options up and see what the Twitter sphere would like, and that might guide you in some sort of way of the ownerships. But yeah, you can make cases for all of them, and you can make cases against them. But
I can't remember ever tipping the team's second ruck at 10,000 as the best option on a slate. So it's just bizarre from that angle.
All right, well, let's move on to defence then. So Zach Tui did score quite well on reflection against the Gold Coast Suns. Should be popular again because his prices remain the same around that 10, 11K mark. Apart from that, the Geelong's defence didn't get any fantasy scoring against the Suns. So I look at the data on the cheat sheets and the points against on the DFR website, and I see that both teams are pretty stingy for defences here. So could we pay down and find hopefully something that can get us value, or I don't know. This is tough.
This is really tough. Actually, the only good thing is that we don't have to pay up for these guys. Like Zach Tui's the most expensive guy on the slate. There's only 2 guys in double figures in the back line here, Tui and Rich. Now Rich is probably the most solid of these backs over the journey. At 11,000, he's priced at pretty much 6x on his average. So he's very reasonably priced from that perspective. So he's probably my favourite of all of them, Rich. I'm going to be more mindful of playing 2 backs from the same team, possibly tying them in with stacks. I think that's more where I can find value in this match rather than arbitrarily picking a couple of these guys out. Looking through the scores from last time these two played, I noticed Mark Blixarves had a big 80-odd, but don't get too fooled by that because he was in the ruck. So something to keep in mind. So hard here. Calamari has gone back down in price at 7,000 there off that 26 he had last week. Now, the one thing I do like about Calamari is he is a mid defender, and if you do want to run with a few linked up Brisbane backs, he gives you the option to roll him through the midfield with a couple with say Rich and maybe old man Birch or something like that, or even a Zach Bailey can play in the midfield as well there. So you do have options to link up all these backs if you want to go down that path.
All right. Well, let's move on to the midfield. And then we've got all the Cats stars here. There's 7+ here who had to take all the lion's share of the fantasy scoring last week. I noticed there was Menegola and Duncan last week, and then could have been Dangerfield and Guthrie in the Melbourne game. So usually some will pop and some will not. So, and then on the flip side, you've got Zorko possibly coming back, but Neil and McCluggage and Lyons, they're all going really, really well. But Neil's priced up to 18K, and it's going to be really hard to get to him.
Let's talk about, first of all, Patrick Dangerfield.
Yep. burnt me last
You,
week. A lot of DraftKings. I went pretty heavy on last year on DraftKings.
yeah, you know how I do like to back up on players that burn the field, but there's so many options from these two teams in the midfield that it's where you got to look at. There's not that much between these players, and you know Dangerfield's going to come with heaps of ownership. Any 13,000, well, 13.9, just a tick under 14k. That is a lock and load for anyone in the last few years playing DFS when it comes to Patrick Dangerfield. He hasn't gone above 94 this season, and he has thrown in. Well, he's thrown in a 68 to 72 in the last 3 weeks with. We didn't really have too much heavy attention. So on that basis, I'm tending to look away from Dangerfield. I think he's pretty easy to avoid on an ownership basis. The thing about these Brisbane midfielders, every single week you look at the top of the team there on Fan Footy and bang, 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 bang. You got the midfield stars from Brisbane. They just keep turning up and topping the fantasy scoring week in, week out. You got to look at Lachie Neale at 18,000. It raises a really interesting ownership point for him because it's very easy to play Jared Lyons. It's very easy to play Hugh McCluggage. If Zorko comes back, all of a sudden there's Zorko taking points. Jared Berry is probably the guy that it would affect, who's had a really good few weeks, but Zorko is probably going to have some effect on him. Do they play Zorko up forward a bit more to get him through with that injury? I just think there's so many options through this midfield that I'm going to pick some of the guys who are a bit less popular. So maybe guys without the name like Dangerfield and without the recent big scores. So a guy like Berry who's got the recent big scores, they might be found a little bit more than what they should be. You reckon there's any cheap ones there for us, Smatho?
Maybe that's 7. There is Narkle. He's at 8,180. I think he'll appear in a lot of teams, either as the fourth midfielder or maybe the second forward.
Yes, he's probably going to pop in the projections there for a lot of these players. Narkle with that average of 56, he's priced at 7x his salary straight up. In these shorter quarters, that's a really high projection, and I think that a lot of the crunches are going to find him, Narkle. Interesting if you go back through his recent history this year and last year, all his good games seemingly have come playing at Geelong. So he sort of strikes me as a guy that you could probably look to fade. He's got a couple of 40s this year. The only problem with that 8,000 price tag is 40 is not going to wreck your team at all. So it's very hard to get a real stinker out of Narkle if you're going to avoid him. But I think he's going to be really high owned, especially with everyone trying to cram these stars in. And maybe he's a guy you can get away from.
Before we move on, I might actually go into the forwards now, and I reckon Brandon Parfitt will be number one choice for a lot of teams in the forward line at 12,700. He's a tackling machine. He's just getting the fantasy tackling up. So I don't think we'll debate about that one having him in or not. But
I reckon that's definitely a debate to have.
Oh, really? SCG, smaller ground, tighter packs equals tackles, wouldn't you think?
Well, in theory, but this is DFS we're talking here, Smatho. There's anytime you lob on these guys as the really obvious play, I think you've got to have a double take. What ownership are we talking here?
Oh, if forward line, I would say at least 40%.
Yeah,
he'll be one. Yeah, at least 40%.
Is there a way to get away from him? That's my immediate thought. Can we get away from Parfitt if he is the obvious guy? So if Parfitt and Narkle are going to come up really high on projections, is there a way we can get away from him? That's my first thought. Maybe there is, because there's so much money we can spend through the midfield, and Brisbane in particular have a lot of really cheap forwards on offer. A guy like Thomas Berry interests me a little bit with Ellis Yom now the team if Zorko doesn't get up. He's a forward, but I think in time his best position will be in the midfield. So if Zorko doesn't come in, then there's potentially a little bit more chance for Berry to run through the midfield there. And at 6,000, he does like to tackle, so maybe the SCG will suit him there. Coming off a 50 against Port Adelaide, which is no mean feat for a youngster, because Port Adelaide are really hard to score against. So he's definitely a guy on my radar, Thomas Berry, to potentially get away a bit from a guy like Narkle. I also noticed Cam Rayner's been playing a bit more through the middle of the ground as well. But it's like every position here, it's so hard to really identify people. I think this slate is going to be won by someone who can build a lineup that makes a lot of sense and potentially fits the game script more than just settling on the right plays, if that makes any sense at all.
Yep. All right. We'll put that game to bed then. Good luck to anyone who takes that particular one. You will get a massive shout out next week, hopefully.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Friday night footy, and we get our favourite Collingwood Magpies on the slate again. They're taking on Hawthorn at Giants Stadium in Sydney. Currently, the Pies are $1.68 favourites, with the Hawks at $2.20, the Lions at 6.5, and the total's at 121.5. Both teams are coming off losses last week. Now, the Hawks did play at Giants Stadium last week as well, and the Pies were there a couple of weeks ago. So they both have ground advantage. They've been playing. They played a game there this year. Mitch Lewis and Jack Scrimshaw are out for the Hawks. Not sure who's going to come in for them as yet. Jordan De Goey is also out after have to wait for another COVID test after being talked to by the Popo over the weekend. Now, 100,000 on Draftstars is up for grabs again on a Friday night. The $6,000 mini, the 7,000 fiver, and the 3,000 micro are all available on Draftstars. Hef, what are your initial thoughts before we get stuck into our favourite players for this slate?
Well, after my real depressed look at the previous game when my head's spinning, I didn't know where to look. I've got a bit more of a handle on this one. First of all, those prices. Interesting that Hawthorn have won the last 3 times these teams have played each other. So all of a sudden they come in here as outsiders. I like the fact that, look, I'm assuming they stayed the week in Sydney. Do we know that for sure?
Hawthorn?
Yeah.
Yes, no, they're in Coogee at the moment. I've seen.
Oh wow, they'll be primed to. Yeah, I like the fact that they've stayed up there already for this game. Yeah, and another little interesting bit of history between these two teams. If we can remember Tommy Mitchell, he hasn't set the world on fire this year since he's come back from injury. But it was 2018, he had 54 touches. And in 2017, he had about 100 in there as well. And those infamous comments from Nathan Buckley that he didn't care if he got the ball. So it'll be interesting to see if he cares this year if he gets the ball. The way he's going, Mitchell, I don't know if he will, but that's something to keep in mind. But, yeah, had a little bit of luck when we were talking up the Giants to beat Collingwood up here a couple of weeks ago. I think Hawthorn are over the odds, and I think they're primed to bounce back, actually, after losing last week.
All right, let's look at the rucks then. And, look, we've got Brodie Grundy again on another Friday night, priced up 17,000 on Draftstars, but this time he faces Segler and big boy McAvoy, who, as I proclaimed early in the show, and I talked about their CBAs for the wrong game, so that's great for me, giving out the wrong information. But yeah, 60-40 split in the ruck last week between Segler and Big Boy, who, to be honest, hasn't been attending any ruck contest until last week. So double ruck stacks are back. You know, McAvoy's a defender and Segler's a forward. We could have a combination of both of these guys. Would you think?
Yeah, you were so excited to get that Ben McAvoy stat out because we talked early in the season about this weird backline strategy for Big Boy McAvoy. And we said there was going to be one game where Clarko just cracks it and throws him back in the ruck, and it's going to be a boon for those who play him in DFS. And Smatho, a little birdie, tells me you were all over him last week.
Yeah, all over him in the ruck position at cheap price. I thought, surely after coming off a 6, he'll score more than that. And then, surprise, he was clunking marks, kicking goals and getting the ruck. Just a shame that I stacked my rest of the team with Hawthorn players instead of Giants players who absolutely kill it that particular day. So, and
Wow.
I also had Segler in my day-long teams on DraftKings, which also sunk me as well. So, Yeah, you have to go Max Gawn when he's on the slate. Don't go the cheap stuff. But yeah, but I
Yeah.
might. Is there any point going back to McAvoy, or let the field go back to him at his cheap price?
Well, we talked how interesting the ruck situation was in the previous game. How about here, a triple ruck stack? I know you love a double. We can play a triple here.
Yes, we can.
We can have Grundy, we can put Segsy forward and McAvoy back. And if you really want to, you can play a quadruple ruck stack with Mason Cox. Don't tell me you're not excited by that.
You could. I can just see the numbers now. You get 100 out of Grundy. You might get 65, 70 out of Segs, 50 out of Big Boy, maybe a 50 out of Coxon.
Yeah, now let's get serious. That's probably an awful idea. What are they going to do with McAvoy? That's the interesting thing. Does Clarkson say enough's enough? It's time to go back to basics, and we play McAvoy and Segler with that ruck forward split that they did for a few years. We sort of look at the Collingwood forward line. Obviously, there's big Mason Cox there. They don't traditionally have the big forward line Collingwood. There's Myercheck. They do like to run. Obviously, De Goey won't be there, but they like to run around the likes of Stephenson and Jamie Elliott and Hoskin Elliott and Josh Thomas and Varco and whoever else they like throwing up there. There's not a lot of tall timber, so whether they decide they don't really need big boy McAvoy back there, I'm starting to lean to the fact that they're going to play him in the ruck. Because we looked last year, McAvoy did a really good job against Grundy. Grundy got his 100, but McAvoy got 80 himself. And he's that bigger size that I think they might be pretty keen to use him in the ruck. But hopefully team lists will help us out here. Some of the Hawthorn faithful have been really savage on Segler, and they're calling for him to be even dropped. I don't think that'll happen, but geez, 8,000. Any sniff of big boy staying in the ruck, and you've got to be all over him, I think.
But wouldn't you think he might stand next to Cox? Or is that a job for Frawley?
Do you need to waste Ben McAvoy on Mason Cox? They've got Frawley. They've got Stratton down there. I'm pretty sure they can handle Mason Cox. Smatho, I reckon you could almost handle Mason Cox the way he's going. What did he come up with last week? He had a whopping 13, which obviously the conditions were against him. At 7,000, he's probably reasonable playable if the ground is dry, which it looks like it's going to be. A bit dewy, if anything. But I'm not going to try and guess what Clarko is going to do, but I think there is a decent chance that McAvoy will be playing in the ruck.
All right, let's move on to the defence. So, as I touched on earlier, the Giants defenders did what they like against the Hawks last week. Just that little +6 down the back was over and over and over and over again. If you didn't have them, it was quite a sight to watch. So, do you reckon the Hawks will employ that particular tactic against the Pies, or will the Pies just go, look, let's just play this game without Jeremy Howe on the back there, but they've got plenty of people who can do that for them?
Yeah, it's a shame we can only play two defenders in this game because, yeah, obviously we know that Hawthorn can really give up a lot of points to the backs, and the key backs especially seem to outperform their price, which we've been on for quite a while. And Collingwood, we only have to think back a couple of weeks ago to the fantasy boss guys cleaning up, playing the backs against the Pies. Yeah, we've seen it a few times this year. And even in recent history, I've been back through the last couple of times they've played. James Sicily had a big 120 last year, and the game before he also had another 90. So he's been up and down, Sicily, this year, but at 10,000, his upside is just, it's nearly unlimited, James Sicily, in this type of matchup. And on the flip side, Darcy Moore, who fits that sort of key defender role that performs well against the Hawks, he's coming off a 90 and an 80 in his last two games against Hawthorn. So at 8,500, that's a stat that would get you a bit excited, I'm sure, Smatho.
Just below Moore is Matt Scharenberg. He got the game last week at 8.6. He scored 50. He was around the packs, but he ended up given lots of handballs, which is obviously, like, I think they got a little rocket during the week about overusing the football itself. So there's some good little cheapies down here. Obviously, Scharenberg, Moore. What else we got down here? Jordan Roughhead.
Jordan Roughhead. He fits the big, tall defender that Hawthorn can leave alone when the ball's changing hands in the back line there. So he definitely fits the bill there. It's also a little get out of jail free card for Ben McAvoy if he doesn't play in the ruck, and you get a bit trigger happy with him there, that his matchup in the back line actually isn't too bad. Which it almost goes further to the fact of playing big ball, especially with Grundy at 17 and change. That's a really, really big price tag even for Grundy.
Well, speaking of big price tags, Draftstars have kind of helped out for Hawks fans with the prices of the midfielders here. Tom Mitchell, under $12,000, $11,900. It's absurd. It's absurd. Ricky Henderson, $9,000 on the dot. Like, these are... Look, Mitchell, you can justify a bit of price drop, but under 12,000. Jeez, is it? Are they playable, or are you just like let everyone else have them on name recognition alone?
Wow, they've obviously been watching Ricky Henderson because he's been awful this year.
Yes.
I think there's as low as he is, Henderson. I think he's much more favourable. If we talk about guys popping in projections, he's priced at only about he's priced at 6x, so people aren't going to go berserk. But he's obviously got that 40 and that 24, which shows that he can still crash your lineup at 9,000. Whereas Mitchell, you look at tick under 12,000, you want to be getting anything 70 and above is going to be passable for Mitchell around that price. And you look at his scores this year, he's got a 69, a 70, and a 70. He hasn't taken the game apart like we know he can fantasy-wise, but any of those scores wouldn't really hurt you too bad at 12K. It's hard to see him throwing in that really low score that would sink your lineup. So obviously he's going to be really popular, but he seems less of the type of player that I would want to be fading, and especially with the fact that he's not going to get any attention here from Collingwood. They're not going to worry about Mitchell. We've seen how Buckley's treated him in the past. I don't see why that would change now. When we're talking about eating chalk, Mitchell's the type of chalk that I'd want to be eating.
Now, we'll give you kudos last week. We talked about Taylor Adams and Treloar. They correlate. 77 points from Adams last week, and then Treloar came out at 105. So kudos to you. Now, will you go again? They're virtually the same price. You back him in, back in another Treloar, or do we just go back to Adams at lower ownership?
I think it's a no-brainer to go with Treloar. I got a bit nervous. As time got closer to that game, I kept thinking, oh, geez, I probably went a bit hard there on Adams being such a risk because he's such a good wet weather footballer, and we were looking for those tacklers, and he obviously stood out there. So for the fact that you only get 77 there, when the conditions really suited him, it really makes me question his upside, which we know has always been affected by Treloar's presence in the team, even with Sidebottom out of the team. DeGoey coming out probably means there's a few more centre bounces where they've got to give it to someone. I don't think they'd give them all to someone like an Elliott or throw them Tyler Brown's way or anything like that. So Adams will probably still be in there as well, but there's just something about that combination with Treloar that doesn't work for him. And in better conditions, I think Treloar's the better play.
Rupert Wills actually had 19% CBAs last week, so that could get a bump, but Elliott also had 33. And I'm actually quite keen on him in the forward line at his price point. Is there any other forwards that you might want to touch on so we can wrap it up tonight?
Yeah, on the forwards, he's not a guy I like to play, Stephenson, which cost me last week. He got up to 80 odd. At 12K, I just don't see the upside. But what's unbelievable is how well he plays in the first quarter.
Yeah.
I'm not a big one for betting on first goals and stuff, but he must be 5-2. Like, this is like when Jack Rewalt used to kick him every week. It's just unheard of.
You wish you had an Olamac and just go, just, just load up every week and just double your money each time. It's extraordinary.
For those who played him last week, they would have been thankful he didn't go home after quarter time like he's done in the weeks leading up. But 12K, he's a guy that I don't mind around the sort of 10 to 11 mark. 12K just seems a little bit expensive to me. Gunston was really good last week against GWS. He scored the second highest of all the Hawthorn players there with 76, and his price hasn't gone up too much. He's still there at a tick under 10,000. So he's a guy that I like playing at that price. Will Hoskin-Elliott is a guy who's been teasing a lot. He's a very risky player, so I wouldn't want to have too much exposure to him, but he does have the potential to go sort of 8, 9, even 10 times his salary there at 9,000. So he's a guy with upside that I think you've got to have some exposure to. Like you say, Jamie Elliott is another of those guys. 8,200, that's a pretty fair price for him, but be warned that these guys can sink your lineups with a 30, so you don't want to have too much exposure to them. We've talked about Mason Cox. Anyone else down there in the cheaper end tickle your fancy?
Our final player we'll talk about tonight is the General. Jono Pat, and I think he's going to be back this week.
5K.
5K. What do you reckon?
That's so cheap. In the past, I was always a bit wary of these tall forwards against Collingwood, just because Collingwood have always seemed to have a number of really well-sized defenders. They've got Moore, they've got Roughhead, they've lost Howe, which makes them a little bit more susceptible to the big guys. They don't have Moore coming across in front of them. You just give me a couple of seconds. I just want to pull up a game and double check a couple of things here, because I think this is probably a really good matchup for Patton, and I like the fact that if he does come back in, he's got to have a bit of sting in his tail, surely. And at 5K, how can you really be sunk? We saw Jeremy Cameron have 66 against the Pies here, which, like, at his sort of price tag, that was all right, Cameron. But what I do remember from that game is Cameron, he got 66 in spite of himself. He was dropping marks. He just didn't look like the player he was. I don't think the opportunity was lacking for him. He just wasn't taking full toll of it. So I think this is probably a sneaky good matchup for Patton. And we've mentioned playing guys at 5K. How bad can it be? As bad as he's been this year, he got 35 last game. That's 7 times his salary. I just don't see how he could sink your team's Patton.
It'll get you the Grundy. I'll tell you that. If you, instead of playing a Cox Grundy combo, you'll get you a Patton Grundy combo. And you'll save
I don't want to be playing Grundy though. I'm going to have too much money here, Smatho. Who can I spend up on?
Fair enough.
Even the midfielders, we don't have to spend that much money on them. No one's higher than 15,000. This is maybe we're not going to need Patton by the time we get through building our lineups. We've got no forwards to spend up on really outside Chad Wingard, who 13K is on the slightly expensive end for him, but he was actually pretty reasonable footy-wise last week against GWS. He showed a bit of fight when the team was generally pretty lacking, and he's got a 100-point upside, which he's flashed this year. So he's a guy we can spend up on. In the back line, we've still only got 2 or 3 guys above that 10K mark. So when I say Patton might not sink your lineup, you might not even be able to take advantage of the money you save for that 5K price tag if you want to avoid Grundy and go with big boy McAvoy. So that's just something to keep in mind. You've got to consider these players not just in the vacuum of their price, but on how well you can spend the rest of that money over the rest of your lineup.
Well, we'll leave you with one hot tip tonight from Smatho is you don't have to spend all your money. If you find all your lineups come up to 98,900, don't feel like you have to spend another $1,000. Just submit your
What
entry.
if they're coming up to 92?
Well, you might want to have another think about it. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to think it has to be 99 and something. If it's 98.7, 98.5, like, put it in. You're going to be, you won't be duped. I tell you that. You won't be duped
That's
at
the
all.
advantage, isn't it? Yeah, you're going to be unique if you're leaving a bit of salary on the table, which 100,000 contests is going to be a ton of teams in. That's I like your thinking there, Smatho.
Oh, let's end the show on that, like you're thinking. All right. Make sure you catch
You don't
our...
need to cut that for Twitter.
You don't. All right, make sure you get to the next episodes of our Down Under show. We'll be back with DraftKings thoughts for these particular two games, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Jesse's articles will be up on the DFR site throughout the weekend. How do you reckon he will go when I ask him to do a Monday article next week? How do you reckon he'll take that, doing 5 days in a row?
He'll do what you tell him and he'll like it, Smatho.
Excellent. I like that response. So hopefully Jesse's articles will be bang on this week. As always, the 3 tools are always available on dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Twitter, Facebook, it's all there for us. Hef, thank you for joining me on tonight's show. Nice big show tonight in the end. We've gone through some lot of content.
Beauty. Thanks, mate. I'll chat with you on the DK show.
Let's go on the DK show. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next time on the Down Under show. See you later.